Part 79. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 781. Let me go, Jean Rouault struggled, attracting the attention of countless palace people along the way. Yins Huang, don't force me to do it. This prince is a man of grace and disdains to do something to women, but don't go too far. Yins Huang didn't care about his shouting and pretended that she didn't see anyone's eyes. She directly carried him and flew towards the royal garden. During this period, Zanruo would try to escape from her grasp. His Highness the Prince's martial arts skills not bad, but limited by the principle of disdain to touch women, it is destined to be impossible to break free from Yin Shuang's control. After all, Yin Shuang's martial arts skills were higher than his own, and he didn't have any principles to restrain him. Naturally, he controlled him tightly and smoothly led him to the royal garden, before finally letting go and throwing him away. Let's go for a walk. Jean Rouault was in such a state of embarrassment that as soon as he got out, he couldn't wait to arrange his robes, and cursed angrily. Sure enough, there are just as many subordinates as there are masters. Your master is annoying, and you are also annoying. It's disgusting. This prince must have been unlucky for 8 lifetimes to get to know you people. Yins Huang stood expressionless on the veranda like an ice sculpture. Zanruo tidied up his clothes and turned around to walk out. Yin Shuang's body flashed and she stood in front of him. What are you doing? Zanruo frowned and glared at her. I'm already in the royal garden, what else do you want? Go shopping. Jean Rouault almost laughed out of anger. Whether or not I go shopping is none of your business. Silverfrost is as immovable as a mountain. Zanruo's anger surged. Get out of the way. Yins Huang ignored him. This prince told you to get out of the way, didn't you hear? Yin Shuang looked at him coldly. Go and stroll in the garden. Zanruo's eyes were on fire and he stared back at her coldly. Yin Shuang's indifferent face showed no signs of looseness, and she didn't have the slightest scruple about the guests. In short, she just said that she would fight him to the end and let him go to the imperial garden. Jean Rouault was so angry that she wanted to fight her. If she won, she would be defeated by force, and if she lost, she would lose face. If you don't fight her, will it take so much time to achieve success? Jean Rouault had a sullen face and just looked at her without saying a word. Suddenly, he had a plan in his mind and said calmly, I heard that Yin Yu is married and has a child. Yins Huang was silent. Don't you plan to get married? Jean Rouault suppressed his anger and looked at her with interest. No one would dare to marry a woman as cold as you. Yins Huang has a cold face. How about I tell you your fortune? Zanruo turned around and walked towards the garden, picking off a branch of a flower. Do you want to tell your fortune or your lifespan? Yins Huang continues to be indifferent. Zanruo frowned, staring at her iceberg face, and couldn't help but said, Yins Huang, is your face modeled after that annoying master of yours? He looked at it with exactly the same indifference. It makes people feel bad. Yin Shuang looked at him expressionlessly, then turned around and walked onto the veranda. She raised her long legs and straddled the railing. She looked really beautiful and sassy, but she still didn't say a word. It was as cold as winter frost. The frozen lake makes people want to break the ice with stones. Zanruo was simply frustrated. I really admire you. Yins Huang glanced at him and finally said, you go shopping, I'll wait for you here. Zanruo frowned, and then he didn't know what he thought of, and the corner of his mouth curled up slightly. If this prince heard me correctly, your master's original words seemed to ask you to accompany me for a walk. Yins Huang was silent for a moment, then jumped down from the railing. Let's go. Jean Rouault. She was so angry that her stomach ached. So Yin Shuang accompanied Jean Rouault for a walk in the imperial garden, walking all the way along the bluestone path, just like a concubine accompanying him, if you ignore Jean Rouault's face that looks like it has been smeared with pot-bottom ash. Black face, the atmosphere seems pretty good. The royal garden is full of flowers, blooming branches, and the scenery is beautiful. Prince Zanruo has a young and beautiful appearance, and Yin's Huang is cold and beautiful. He is walking quietly and leisurely in the imperial garden, and it looks like a pleasing scenery. The author has something to say. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 782. Nan 11 never expected that Yin's Huang would accompany Zanruo for half a day in the imperial garden. When she heard the report from the palace that Prince Zanruo was forced by Yin's Huang to stay in the imperial garden to enjoy the flowers and take a walk, and strictly prohibited him from leaving the imperial garden, Her Majesty the Queen, who had always been gentle and calm, rarely showed a dumbfounded expression. The two of them stayed in the royal garden for a long time and didn't leave. The palace man said respectfully, reporting to Her Majesty the Queen, Prince Zanruo was not willing to stay in the imperial garden at first. It was the Yin's Huang guards who forced him to stay and used force to prevent him from leaving several times. Nan 11 was silent, her expression was both subtle and interesting, and she didn't speak for a long time. She just said, no matter how difficult it is to deal with someone, there is always someone in this world who can defeat him. Besides, it shouldn't be a surprise that Yin's Huang can behave in such a hardcore way. With a smile on her lips, Nan 11 turned to look at Rong Yu and smiled faintly. Rong Yu, what do you think? Rong Yu was sitting in front of the royal case checking her silent writing. When he heard this, he just said calmly, the marriage can be granted. A childish, irritable, and impulsive kid deserves someone to treat him well, and Yin's Huang is obviously the best candidate. Nan 11 was silent and could tell from these 5 words how impatient Rong Yu was towards Zanruo. She pondered for a moment and then said slowly, there is no rush to give a marriage to Zanruo for the time being. Let them get along for a while first, and then they can really work out their feelings. After all, Yu country has not yet belonged to Dongling, so if he rashly gives Zanruo a marriage, I'm afraid King Yu won't be able to sleep. If the two people are really not suitable, the matter will be dropped, and a pair of resentful couples cannot be given. Rong Yu hummed, and used a red pen to circle a dozen typos on the paper written by her silently. He said in a calm tone, these words are more complicated and difficult to write. I will give you another chance this time. I will copy all the typos 20 times. You can write the words do, ju, and li several times until you master it. Hauer stared at the words circled in ink on the paper, pursed her lips slightly, a little nervous, and a little surprised that her father was so kind and pleasant, although compared to Nan 11's gentleness, Rong Yu's tone at this time was quite serious. He couldn't be nice, but Hauer was used to his father's majesty in front of others. The expression and tone at this time can be called gentle. Write it down again before going to bed at night. If you still make mistakes, you will be slapped on the palm with a ruler. Rong Yu reminded him, my father has not touched you yet, but sooner or later there will be a first time. You have to think about it yourself. Hauer responded respectfully and said, thank you, father, for your teaching. Rong Yu motioned for him to go over and copy. Hauer took his own copy and walked to his small desk and sat down. He spread the rice paper on the desk again, pressed the corners with a ruler, held the pen skillfully with his small hands, and sat upright in a graceful manner. Began to write and copy. He started learning early, but he was still young after all. After he could speak, Xianyu and Qi mostly taught him how to read, half playing and half studying. He started taking formal classes when he was 2 years old, teaching him how to read, how to hold a pen, and how to sit upright when writing. Posture, write some simple words. Hauer learns things very quickly. Although his handwriting is still very immature, he has practiced his pen-holding posture very well. Now at the age of 3, he can already recognize all the characters in the 3-character classic and can memorize them all, but he still has some difficulty in dictating. However, for a child of this age, his performance is already outstanding enough, and he also has to exercise, stand up, and start practicing martial arts. Today, Hauer memorized the first 60 characters of the 3-character classic. Silent writing is much more difficult than memorizing it, so the whole text was divided into multiple dictations. He first fully mastered the first 60 characters before continuing to memorize the remaining parts. If Rongyu's requirements were followed, this kind of progress would definitely not be enough, but Nan 11 didn't like to let the child have no time to rest. When the child grows up, he should pay attention to the balance between work and rest, so that he has enough time to enjoy children's childhood, as well as enjoying family affection, cannot become puppets who can only read and practice martial arts. Rongyu didn't want to go against Nan 11's footsteps, so he left Hauer studies completely to Xianyu and Qi before he was 3 years old, with little interference from him. But it was obvious that after Hauer turned 3, Rongyu began to have demands on him. Hauer is 3 years old. Nan 11 leaned on the brocade couch and looked at her son sitting in front of the desk with gentle eyes. From today on, he will slowly understand the weight of the world's great responsibilities, and will deeply understand the responsibility of his shoulders, the price of responsibility. Rongyu sat in front of the imperial cabinet and looked up at her. There are still some papers that have not been approved. Why don't 11er come over and read them with me? Yes. Nan 11 stood up and asked the wet nurse to bring Jeanner over. Jeanner, sit next to my brother and write with him. Jeanner sat on the stool and called brother obediently, then sat quietly and stopped moving or talking, just looking at his brother quietly. Hauer turned to look at him, holding the pen in his right hand. He touched his brother's head with his left hand, then quickly turned his face and continued to copy seriously. Keep these words in mind as you write. The Taisho Palace is very quiet, but the atmosphere is warm. There is warmth in the seriousness. Hauer was writing on the side, while Rongyu and Nan 11 were reviewing the memorial quietly, each doing their own thing without disturbing each other, but they would never let Hauer be left alone or feel left out. This emperor is destined to be different from usual ones. Not only is the relationship between husband and wife the deepest, but the affection between father, son, mother, and son is also unmatched by previous emperors. Rongyu is strict with his son, but not so strict as to constrain him with cold and ruthless palace rules, and will not overly restrict the relationship and distance between parents and sons. In Dajhan Palace, they are just a family with blood ties. Rongyu's strictness is to train his son to become a powerful king, but at the same time, he and Nan 11 will also let his son feel that his parents care about them at all times. Author's words. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 783. He will never just focus on having fun when Hauer is being punished, but will be busy with state affairs to let the child feel that his parents are with him and give him a sufficient sense of security. This is the way Nan 11 and Rongyu communicated with their children through countless nights. Rongyu had hardly enjoyed any tenderness when he was young. Nan 11 did not want to repeat a cold childhood for her son. She hoped that he could be a normal child with 7 emotions and 6 desires, and be more calm and self-possessed than ordinary children, and more emperor-like. But the warmth that should be enjoyed must be there. Rongyu agreed with her unconditionally. However, he always spoke the truth. Before going to bed at night, Hauer laid out a brand new piece of rice paper on the small desk and began to write down seriously. He sat up straight and held the pen in a straight posture. Nan 11 couldn't help but feel a little worried. After all, ordinary children are just starting to learn at the age of 3. They focus on reading, copying less, and writing from memory is more difficult. Moreover, Rongyu had spoken first, and if he made any mistakes in dictation, he would be slapped on the palm. Hauer was not very scared yet. As a mother, she was already a little nervous. Nan 11 stood aside and watched for a moment. Hauer was focused on writing down tender handwriting on the rice paper. In the beginning, human beings are inherently good. Similar in nature, but far apart in habits. If you don't teach, your nature will change. The most important thing in teaching is specialization. Nan 11 stood aside quietly, watching Hauer write word by word. A child born into a royal family is born with his own responsibilities and is destined to bear more hardships. However, compared to ordinary people's families, since he was born, he has had favorable conditions that no other child has. Enjoy fine clothes, fine food, noble status, a full-time tutor, one-on-one martial arts lessons, and receive the best education method from childhood to adulthood. As long as your qualifications are not too mediocre and dull, you will naturally have both civil and military skills and outstanding abilities when you grow up. Except for mud that cannot hold up the wall. Hauer has good qualifications and has nothing to do with mud. With his strict requirements and his natural magnanimity, it can be imagined that he will be a good emperor in the future. Nan 11 watched for a while, and when Hauer had written the first 30 characters completely and correctly, she turned around and walked to the imperial case, and began to help Rongyu read the memorial. There were a lot of things going on in the past 2 days. After the spring festival, there was the imperial examination. The decision has not yet been made during the palace examination. Xian Yuanyao needs to send troops and prepare food and fodder. Excerpts from various departments were presented to the imperial desk like snowflakes, and they all needed to be approved by Her Majesty the Queen and the Prince Regent Zubai. Jeanner sat on the stool and began to doze off. His little head was shaking bit by bit and his eyelids were twitching. The wet nurse couldn't help but laugh. It's time for the second prince to go to bed. I will carry him to the side hall. Since the child is young, it is the time to eat, drink and sleep. Usually he has already gone to bed at this time. Tonight is to accompany his brother, so it is not easy to stay up so late. No. No, Jeanner's mouth tightened, and he held it in for a long time before he finally managed to say what he wanted to say. No. I won't sleep. Nan 11 turned around and held her in her arms. Why don't you sleep? Brother, brother. Jeanner grabbed his mother's clothes with his little hands. No. Don't fight. Nan 11 was stunned and then laughed. Is this because you love your brother and are afraid that he will be beaten? The two royal highnesses have such a good relationship, the wet nurse said with a smile. I will definitely have a better relationship when we grow up. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 784. Nan 11 felt soft in her heart. She is truly blessed to have these two children in this life. Holding Jeanner in her arms, Nan 11 said softly, brother will not be beaten, Jeanner can sleep. Jeanner was worried. Although his eyelids were too sleepy to hold on any longer, he still stubbornly wanted to maintain his last bit of consciousness and stay with his brother until the last moment. It wasn't until Hauer memorized all 60 words and handed them to Rongyu for inspection together with what he copied this afternoon, and confirmed that there were no typos and that he would not be beaten, that Jeanner's little face showed a charming smile, and he leaned against his mother with confidence. He fell asleep in his arms. Nan 11's innocent and peaceful little face made Nan 11 feel happier the more she looked at him. She couldn't help but lower her head and kiss him before giving him to the wet nurse to take him to bed. The handwriting is good. Although Rongyu's expression was indifferent, he did not hesitate to praise his son. Go to bed. Despite Ren Xiaoer's calm and indifferent temperament, he is still only a 3-year-old child. After hearing his father's words, his tight little face showed signs of relaxation, and he respectfully faced Rongyu and Nan 11. After saying good night, Hauer excuses himself. Then he turned around and walked to the side hall with the wet nurse. The wet nurse is holding Jeanner in one hand and holding Hauer in the other. There are also several smart and attentive older palace maids in the side hall. They are all experienced people but gentle enough. They will take good care of the two children's bedtime issues. Nan 11 watched them leave, with a mother's tenderness and love in her eyes. How lucky am I to give birth to two such outstanding children. Rong Yu's expression was subtle, and then he said, You 11er, such an excellent mother, should have given birth to such an excellent son. Nan 11 chuckled lightly and turned to look at him, having half the credit is due to the husband. Rong Yu reached out and took her into his arms, saying, My credit is also yours. Nan 11 was silent for a moment, then reached out and pinched his face. Since you admit that Hauer is excellent, why can't you praise him in front of Hauer? He is still young, so the appropriate amount is definitely enough. There is no need to boast too much. Rong Yu said, Don't worry, 11er, he is our son, and I won't put too much pressure on him. Nan 11 couldn't help but want to sigh. She believed in Rong Yu, believed that he loved her son, and believed that he was sincerely doing it for Hauer's good. She also believed that what he said won't put too much pressure was sincere, but she understood the pressure and Rong Yu's cognitive pressure is definitely not on the same line. Moreover, Nan 11 could see that compared to her, a loving mother, Hauer got along better with Rong Yu. She obviously looked up to her father with some admiration. It was a natural congeniality. With Rong Yu as a mountain, pressing down has created an unshakable pressure on Hauer. He will follow him unconsciously and use his father as his goal to force himself to make progress. I don't think you need to use a ruler, Nan 11 said, as long as you, as a father, show even the slightest dissatisfaction, Hauer will review himself with fear, and then urge himself to reach a level that satisfies you. Rong Yu, Your Majesty, it's a pressure that no one can bear calmly. Rong Yu looked down at her with a very subtle expression. 11er, I feel like what you said is as scary as King Yama. When Nan 11 heard this, she actually thought about it seriously. For me, I don't feel this way. For other people, it's probably similar to King Yama. Rong Yu was silent, lowered his head and kissed the side of her face. Shall we go to bed too? I haven't finished reading the book yet. Rong Yu picked her up and walked to the inner hall. I've dealt with the important things. I'll see the rest tomorrow. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 785. In the past few days, when they were guests in Dongling, the two princes of the Yu Kingdom tried to come to the Dajhan Palace several times to pay their respects, but they were stopped in time by King Yu, who had a strong sense of worry. The regent of Dongling is someone you can't afford to offend. Anyone who wants the Yu Kingdom to be wiped out as soon as possible should go and dance in front of Her Majesty the Queen twice more. King Yu warned coldly, Look at all of you dressed in fancy clothes. He looks like a peacock, but he doesn't look like a prince. It's more like a brothel. The two princes were so scolded by him that they blushed and hesitated, but in their hearts they hated Jean Ruo and gritted their teeth. It's all that damn guy's fault. It is said that Her Majesty the Queen likes good-looking people. Whoever can win the favor of Her Majesty the Queen can inherit the throne of the Feather King. Is the regent of Dongling an easy person to offend? If the regent really gets jealous, it's hard to say whether he will be able to return home, let alone inherit the throne of King Yu. We will go back at the end of the month. King Yu glared at his two unsatisfactory sons. He simply hated the iron. If you are half as capable as Ruo, you can burn high incense and be worthy of our ancestors. Look at you, such a disgraceful appearance. The second prince finally couldn't help but argue, Father, I don't know. The reason why my third brother and I are dressed up like this is because of what the elder brother said. What did your eldest brother say? King Yu said angrily. You did everything he said. Are you two brainless idiots? You don't know what is right and what is wrong? He asked you to die. Will you die? The third prince said, I would like to report to my father, my dear brother is really. Shut up, too. King Yu stared at the two of them with cold eyes, looking at them as if they were looking at idiots. Do you know how many things Ruo has done for you country? If he hadn't been here, do you think your country can remain intact until now despite all the dealings in front of Her Majesty the Queen? Without him, your country would have been destroyed by the Iron Cavalry, so you still dare to complain? The two princes were immediately speechless. I'm warning you, if you dare to take a step closer to the Dajhan Palace, I will deprive you of your position as prince. If you go back, King Yu said coldly, if you don't believe in evil, go and try it. The two princes timidly agreed and promised repeatedly that they would never prance in front of Her Majesty the Queen, which made King Yu feel relieved. However, for the sake of safety, King Yu decided to return home early, lest these two brainless idiots cause him trouble. In the evening at the end of May, Qing Ling's stomach started to attack. After a night of pain, she safely gave birth to her daughter in the early morning of June 1st. When the news came to the palace, Nan 11 was even happier than Chu Nanyi. After giving birth to so many sons, I finally have one daughter. The rewards in the palace were larger than usual. Chu Nanyi thanked him respectfully and got a full month's leave. In the scorching sun of June, King Yu said goodbye sincerely and humbly, saying that he was going back to prepare for the borrowing of the road, and that the kingdom of Yu could not rest for too long, so he could reassure the ministers by returning earlier. However, this request was rejected by Her Majesty the Queen, and Nan 11 persuaded her to stay. The weather is hot right now, which is not suitable for traveling. Your Majesty is the king of the Yu kingdom after all. If you catch the heat, I will feel guilty and blame myself for it, so please still ask your Majesty, please stay a little longer. This is just a rhetoric. King Yu understood what Her Majesty the Queen meant, which was that she did not want him to leave just yet, so the father and son could only stay. Of course King Yu still doesn't know that the Emperor of South Vietnam has already received the news that he and his three sons were invited to Dongling as guests. Although the countries are far apart and the transmission of the news takes at least 10 days or even longer, but this does not prevent ambitious kings from secretly sending people to monitor the movements of various countries. People who are ambitious and suspicious are more sensitive than ordinary people. The small Yu kingdom has never been taken seriously by the powerful countries, and it is even rarer to be actively invited by the powerful kings, unless there is an ulterior motive. Therefore, South Vietnam was already wary of Yu Guo's visit to Tangling, and had made plans to deal with it. It's a pity that Rong Yu didn't plan to give them time to respond. Prince Yu and his son stayed in Dongling until July. Xian Yuanyao stayed in the military camp every day to train and reorganize his troops. Food, fodder, and military pay were also actively prepared. The cabinet ministers and imperial favorites in the Dongling court were busy, visible to the naked eye. At the beginning of July, King Yu once again asked to leave, but was still persuaded by Her Majesty the Queen to stay. Prince Zanruo is very popular with me. I want to keep him in the palace for a few more days, Nan 11 said with a warm smile. Although Yu Kingdom and Dongling are neighboring countries, they rarely have contact with each other. This is a rare occasion. If there is such an opportunity, the king can stay for a while. I happen to have some strategic issues that I would like to discuss with the king. So King Yu could only stay. Nearly a month passed, and at the end of July, Her Majesty the Queen finally took the initiative to ask King Yu to leave. Xian Yuanyao ordered 60,000 iron cavalry, 10,000 black Yao troops, and 50,000 golden armor troops. Following His Majesty's orders, he embarked on the long road to conquer South Vietnam in the name of escorting King Yu back to his country. Xiejin rode his horse and galloped out of the city, watching the mighty cavalry army go further and further away. Their iron hoofs were like thunder, and the army was majestic. Sitting on the horse, the ninth master of the Xie family raised his lips slightly, with a smile on his face, and murmured, "The little leopard will finally become famous all over the world." With the departure of the cavalry army and the king of Yu Kingdom, peace returned to the imperial city again. When the army left, Zanruo hadn't left yet. In his words, the army was marching slowly, and it didn't matter if he was left behind for a few days. When the time came, he and Yinshuang would work hard and catch up in less than 3 days. In the past 2 months, Yinshuang and Zhanruo's relationship has made great progress. In order to avoid being disturbed by the annoying guy from time to time, Rong Yu ordered Yinshuang to be responsible for entertaining him. Although Yinshuang is cold and taciturn, she has always been strict in executing orders and never vague. In the morning when the weather is cool, she will accompany the prince to visit the imperial garden to see the flowers blooming in summer, and accompany Prince Zhanruo to the lake to see the lotus blooming in the center of the lake. In the evening, she will walk around the palace. At noon, she will choose a cool and comfortable pavilion, cut some fruits, and chill watermelon, and let Yinshuang feed him mouthful by mouthful. If Prince Zhanruo wants to leave the palace, Yinshuang will also accompany him closely. In short, as long as Zhanruo is there, Yinshuang will definitely be seen. The woman who used to have little presence has become Zhanruo's nightmare during this period. In the words that Zhanruo often says, she is a haunting ghost. Every time he is angry, his face turns blue, his heartbeat speeds up, his anger soars, and his blood boils. However, Yinshuang was as cold as ice from beginning to end, and could not empathize with his emotional changes. Whether he was angry or furious, Yinshuang just looked at him calmly, not affected at all. Unexpectedly, before leaving, Zhanruo actually took the initiative to take Yinshuang to Yu country, which was really unexpected. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 786. After the scorching summer, the world was finally in turmoil. Rumors that the emperor of South Vietnam wanted to marry Queen Dongling fermented and became an unstoppable trend. The regent of Tanglin was angry and sent troops, which was bound to teach South Vietnam, which had repeatedly provoked, an unforgettable lesson. So 60,000 cavalry borrowed the Dayu kingdom and headed for South Vietnam with the power of thunder. This news was like a hurricane, sweeping all the countries in the world instantly. The spies worked hard to send pieces of news to their respective countries. The 800-mile rush has become the norm, and the kings and dignitaries of various countries seem to suddenly wake up from their dreams. Discussions and alliances are preparing for the worst. Of course, when they get the news and urgently discuss countermeasures, Dong the Ling cavalry has passed through the Yu kingdom and arrived at the border of South Vietnam, making South Vietnam feel like it is facing a formidable enemy. The calm and stable situation was finally broken. Opposite the Yuguo grassland is Shuashan Mountain. It is easy to defend but not difficult to attack. The map was placed on the table, and Rong Yu's slender fingers pointed at a mountain range marked on the map. This mountain range has relatively low terrain. It is relatively flat and not the best defensive location. If the non-Yu army sets up defenses here, the defense inside Shuashan city will be weak. As long as Xianyu Enyao breaks this defense, he can easily capture the first city. Nan 11 hummed and looked at the map. In fact, their best way is to deploy troops in the city, strengthen the defense of soldiers and horses at the city tower, and set up mechanisms and arrows, although this may not be able to prevent the army from breaking through the city, but at least I can hold on for a few more days. Rong Yu was silent for a moment. If they deploy troops on the city tower, the Shuashan mountain range will be borrowed by Xianyu Enyao. Xianyu Enyao can do many things with the shelter of this mountain range. Nan 11 raised her lips. The Dongling iron cavalry traveled a long distance. When they arrived at Shuashan mountain, both men and horses were exhausted and needed to camp and rest. Yes, Rong Yu nodded. the situation on the battlefield is ever-changing, and tactics need to be adjusted at any time. Different situations have different response methods, but most of the time there is no escape from the same law. When the strength reaches a certain level, all conspiracies will, there is no hiding from the tricks. Strength, of course, does not only refer to combat effectiveness, but also includes the coach's ability to mobilize troops. As long as the tactics are used well and the soldiers are strong, there is no city that cannot be conquered and no head that cannot be taken. When the world is at peace, a large amount of money is spent on the training of soldiers and horses, not because of boredom, but to save more time in wartime, reduce casualties of soldiers, and teach those self-righteous people an unforgettable lesson. Nan 11 held her chin. I'll just wait for the news of Xian Yuanyao's victory. It shouldn't take long. Your Majesty, Prince Regent. The guards outside the Dajhan Palace came in and reported, "Thank you for your request, Your Majesty." Rong Yu said, "Let him come in." After saying this, he stood up and walked to the imperial case. He took out a few memorials from a pile and looked through them one by one to confirm. Xiejing quickly walked into the palace and saluted respectfully, "I see Her Majesty the Queen and Your Majesty." No gift. Rong Yu turned around and handed him the fold. "These folds have been approved. You can take them back and deal with them. The first batch of grain and grass has been escorted by Chu Nanyi and others. If nothing happens, it can be supported. In 2 months, you will be responsible for escorting the second batch of food and fodder. In these 2 months, you should finish what you need to do early, and don't have too much backlog, and you will be unable to get out when the time comes." Xiejin accepted the order. "I obey. Chu Nanyi's wife just gave birth and the baby is still young. If Mo Lingan can help with the things in his hands, let Mo Lingan help more." Rong Yu glanced at him and said, "You too, you are a bit discerning." Xiejin's mouth twitched and he couldn't help but argue, "I am wronged." Rong Yu frowned. "Why are you being wronged?" "I have been very busy these past 2 days in preparing food, fodder, and military pay. There are also several old cases in the Ministry of Punishment that have been uncovered by some bastard recently. It is said that there are grievances that need to be overturned and reiterated. They were all 800 years ago. How can I try the case? There are also 2 murders that have happened in the imperial city recently. Dali Temple is investigating and reporting to the Ministry of Punishments from time to time." Xiejin started to feel melancholy as he spoke. "I am already very diligent. It's really hard to do anything else. The army has set off, and the food and fodder have been prepared and the military pay has been prepared. For the time being, it can be a little slow to reserve military supplies. However, as the Minister of the Ministry of Household Affairs, he must personally approve all the money that needs to be used. He also has to decide the case of the Ministry of Punishment, as if it were everything. It's all piled up this month. Xiejin is really busy." Rong Yu hummed, "In that case, I will arrange for someone else to escort you when it comes to food and grass. You can concentrate on the case at hand." "Farewell, Your Majesty." Xiejin's face straightened. "Those who are capable work harder. It is my duty to share my lord's worries and relieve my work. I dare not be lazy." Rong Yu's face was expressionless. "The responsibilities of the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Households are on you. It's normal that you don't have time. I can understand it." "Your Majesty." Xiejin lowered his head and his attitude became more humble and sincere. "I will definitely finish all the things at hand within this month. I will not be tired of escorting the grain and grass. I hope Your Majesty will see clearly." Rong Yu glanced at him and said nothing for a while. Xiejin's robe was lifted up and he was about to kneel down, but Rong Yu held his arm. "Okay." Rong Yu frowned slightly, turned around and walked behind the imperial case. "Go and do your work. I've finished my work today. I'll just give these books to them later." Xiejin said, "I have always said that I would take His Highness the Prince out to observe the people's sentiments. I am free tonight and would like to take His Highness the Prince out for a walk change. Wrong, you hummed and ordered someone to bring Hauer over. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 787. The sun sets in the evening. The whole imperial city is bathed in a red glow. Holding Hauer's hand and walking outside the palace, Xiejin put the cushion he brought from Dajhan Palace on the saddle, and then carried Hauer on his horse. Xiejin also climbed on the horse. Where does your highness want to go? Hauer had no expression. I'll listen to Uncle Jin's arrangements. Xiejin smiled. Okay, I'll take your highness to see different scenery today. After speaking, Xiejin turned the horse's head holding the reins and galloped towards the streets of the imperial city. The first place to go is the south of the city. Although there are many powerful people in the imperial capital, most of them live in the most prosperous inner city at the foot of the imperial city. There are more ordinary people living in the south, west, and north of the city. The saddle is padded with a soft cushion, so the little prince doesn't worry about being uncomfortable when sitting on the horse. The small body is firmly protected in Xiejin's arms. Riding the horse through the main city streets, Xiejin chose a secluded street with few people and galloped all the way. Although August has passed the hottest climate, the weather is still hot. It is much cooler at night. Xiejin galloped with Hauer on horseback, whistling like a gust of wind. The cool air brushed the ears and cheeks, penetrated the skin inside the lapels, and brought unprecedented comfort. Hauer's eyes were obviously more excited, enjoying the excitement of galloping on horseback. Does the prince like this feeling? Xiejin lowered his head and asked with a smile in Hauer's ear. Hauer looked forward, with excitement on his little face, and could hardly maintain his usual coldness. I like it. Xiejin smiled. You are really a brave child. The horse ran for a while and stopped under a sycamore tree outside an alley. Xiejin turned over and dismounted with Hauer in his arms, tied the reins to the tree, and walked into the alley with Hauer. The alley was narrow and long. Xiejin seemed to be familiar with the place, and said lightly as he walked, Hauer stays at home every day, and all he can see is wealth and prosperity. Your parents have a good relationship, and you have a lovely brother, so you don't know yet that there are actually many people of all kinds in this world, and every day they live a different life. Hauer didn't say anything. He could understand every word of Xiejin's words, but it seemed difficult for him to understand them immediately when they were put together. People of all kinds? Hauer was thinking about what this sentence meant, and suddenly his little body was embraced by Xiejin, and his body flew into the air. Xiejin took him to stand between the branches of a big tree. The big tree was dense, with many branches and leaves, enough to cover the figures of the two. Hauer saw a small courtyard with bluestone slabs and a main room. The room was lit. The courtyard was very small, with no front yard or backyard, and no garden pavilion or corridor. It was just a small courtyard and a main room, and it didn't look very wealthy. A young woman was cooking in the simple kitchen next to the main room. At this time, there was a knock on the door. The young lady hurriedly wiped her hands on her apron and walked out to open the door. The door of the courtyard was locked from the inside. Standing outside and knocking on the door was a young man wearing a gentle blue cloth shirt, who looked like a scholar. My husband is back. The woman opened the door and smiled at the man. The meal will be ready soon. My husband, wash your face and sit for a while. Don't worry. The man closed the door with his backhand, took the young woman's hand, and kissed her on the forehead. Is the child naughty today? No, he is very good. I brought a gift for my wife. The woman was stunned, then smiled, and said, What did my husband buy again? I can't wear all the hairpins you bought for me, and I have enough clothes to wear. Save some money for the child to study when he grows up. The man took out a box from behind him, just an ordinary brocade box. After opening it, he saw a pair of silver white round pearl earrings lying in the brocade box. The pearls were not big, slightly larger than rice grains, and the quality was not as good as those used by the ladies of the powerful families, but for a woman from a commoner family, this gift was enough to make her happy. The man quickly took the woman's hand and walked into the house. Hauer's face was expressionless, his brows were slightly knitted, and he was actually a little confused about why Siejin brought him to see this couple. This is an ordinary couple, they have a good relationship, and their life is relatively stable and peaceful. Siejin's voice sounded in his ears. Although such a man has no status and position, he is still ambitious and has some knowledge. He works as a teacher in the academy. He doesn't earn much money, but it is enough to support the daily expenses of a family of 3. Hauer turned his head and looked at him, with some obvious confusion in his eyes. Don't worry. Siejin hugged his waist and jumped down the tree, and continued to walk deeper into the alley. After walking for a while, Siejin once again held Hauer and flew into the air. The same environment can also have different lives. Tonight, Siejin took Hauer to see the various aspects of life. Ah! The woman screamed miserably, and Hauer was startled. He turned around and saw a strong man dragging the woman's hair against the wall. The woman's hair was messy and her mouth was cracked. Under the control of the man, she was like a weak chicken and had no power to resist. Ah, no. Spare me. Spare me. Bitch, the man cursed and slapped the woman hard, making her lie on the ground. I have never had a comfortable day in my life because of you, an unlucky woman. He slapped her mercilessly, and the woman fell heavily to the ground, as if she was knocked unconscious by the slap. She didn't react for a long time. The man turned around and walked into the house, cursing. He didn't know what he was holding in his hand. When he came out, he kicked the woman hard, and then opened the door and left without looking back. Hauer frowned and turned to look at Siejin. This is also a commoner's home. It should be the same as the couple just now. Siejin smiled lightly. Your Highness, do you think that man deserves to die? Hauer was silent for a moment, and nodded slowly, yes. He took the money to gamble, and when he lost the bet, he came back to beat his wife. He originally had a small fortune, but all the money in the family was lost by him. Siejin said lightly, he came back to beat his wife when he lost. This kind of person is very hateful, but the emperor in the palace can't control them. Hauer frowned slightly. Why? Because the emperor is in charge of the world's affairs. Hauer pursed his lips, not knowing if he understood. The emperor can make rules and laws, but there are many ordinary people in the world, and there are many people with the same character as the man who beat people just now. We can still see them at the foot of the imperial city, but what about farther away? There are such people everywhere. The emperor doesn't have so much free time to take care of them, and their words and deeds do not constitute a capital crime, so what do you think should be done? Hauer was thoughtful. Siejin laughed and stretched out his hand to pinch his little face. A 3-year-old child puts on such a mature expression, it really makes people want to pinch it. Hauer looked at him dissatisfied. You are committing a crime against your superiors. Well, your Highness is right. Siejin pretended to apologize. I am a subordinate who commits a crime against my superiors, and I deserve to die. Hauer pursed his lips and said nothing. The emperor can't take care of trivial matters, but local officials can. Siejin continued, so this requires the king to know people and use them well. Don't use confused officials. You must appoint good officials who are willing to work for the people. Hauer seemed to understand, but nodded slowly, yes. Siejin hugged him and jumped down, but no matter how wise and smart the officials are, they can't go to someone's house to handle the case. Hauer was stumped again. So what? The Dali temple usually needs a plaintiff and a defendant, that is, the victim takes the initiative to beat the drum to file a complaint, and then the officials can accept the case. Siejin said, but the woman who was beaten just now, she will not go to file a complaint. Hauer puzzled, why? Author has something to say. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 788. Because the man who beat her was her husband, many people think that it is a household matter for a husband to beat his wife. As long as there is no murder case, there is no need to alert the government, Xiejin said lightly. The wife will also think that her husband is the head of the family. If you sue him, the consequences will be serious. If the husband is beaten by an official, he will be more resentful and vent it on his wife and children. If an official is involved and the husband is beaten to death, the wife will lose her husband. Hauer was silent for a moment. It's okay not to have a husband like that. But a widow who loses her husband will not live a good life either. Xiejin shook his head. When outsiders know that her husband died after being reported by her, they will point fingers at her. If she is poked in the spine in the future, people will curse her. You may even be bullied by men, and you will never have a peaceful life. Hauer was silent for a moment. Her husband is alive, but she still has no peace. So when you meet such a man, it seems that no matter what you do, it is wrong, and a woman can only admit that she is unlucky. Xiejin sighed. What do you think your highness should do? Hauer lowered his eyes slightly and walked in the alley holding hands with Xiejin. He thought carefully for a while. Since he went back to beat his wife after losing money, why not let him gamble? Xiejin was silent for a moment, then patted his head with appreciation. Your highness is so smart. Hauer didn't like being coaxed by him like a child, but he couldn't be rude to his elders, so he could only stay silent. How can we prevent him from gambling? Xiejin then asked. Is there anything your highness can do? Hauer pursed her lips and thought for a while. The questions Xiejin asked tonight were too complicated. It was difficult for him to accept these things that were completely different from those in the palace. Men gamble, but the concept of gambling is not very clear to him. What kind of gambling method is it, and how to stop him from gambling? And if the husband dies, why will the wife be criticized? Should a man not be punished for making a mistake? The wife is obviously the victim. Why should she live in peace all her life? Hauer had only a partial understanding of these questions and had no way of giving an answer. It's not too late yet. I'll take your highness to another place to have a look. Xiejin took Hauer's hand and walked out of the alley, took off the reins from under the tree, held Hauer on the horse, and followed him to get on the horse. Just now we looked at the most ordinary people's house. Now we will take you to see the official's inner residence. Hauer sat on the horse and turned to look in the direction of the alley. Are we not going to care? What does it matter? Hauer pointed in the direction of the alley, the wife who was beaten just now. How to care? Xiejin raised his eyebrows. I am a man. If I show up at her house rashly, it will bring disaster to her. She is injured. Logically, we should hire a doctor for her, but what are our identities? What if her husband comes back to see her and asks for a doctor and suspects that she has hidden the money? Hauer was confused by his question. The world looks peaceful, but in fact there are many people like that family just now, with violent men and weak women. Xiejin said calmly, it is a rule passed down from ancient times that women obey men. Meeting a good man is a woman's blessing. When a woman encounters a bad-tempered person, she will suffer for the rest of her life. Hauer pursed her lips, not knowing what she was thinking. Don't think too much. Xiejin touched his head. Tonight I just want to show you the different sentiments of the people. There are all kinds of things in the world. What we see tonight is just the tip of the iceberg. It's not just about prosperity and wealth, it's also about people's suffering. People are the foundation of the world. Hauer was silent for a moment. Why doesn't your father care? Didn't I tell you just now? The king is in charge of the affairs of the world. There are not many things like just now. They happen all over the world. If the king takes care of everything, can he handle it? Xiejin chuckled. The king is in charge. What is important is the well-being of the people, so that every household can have a stable meal and wear warm clothes. The king must punish corrupt officials and eliminate filthy officials, and try his best to ensure that there are enlightened and diligent officials in all parts of the world. The king must reuse generals to maintain the family and the country. For stability and territorial integrity, we must make good use of good ministers. Uncle Jinhao frowned tightly. You talk too much, I can't remember it. Xiejin was silent for a moment. Well, he almost forgot that the little prince was only more than 3 years old and could not understand what he said yet. It doesn't matter, you don't need to know too much for the time being, Xiejin said with a warm smile. In the future, if you go out often, you will see a lot of different things, and slowly you will understand everything. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 789. Xiejin took Hao to an honorable mansion. This family's surname is Cen. It was a well-known aristocratic family in Dongling 100 years ago. Our ancestors have produced champions and generals. Among the women, there have been 1 queen and 2 concubines. This shows how prosperous it was in its heyday. This mansion was big. Xiejin carried Hao and climbed over the high wall in the backyard. There was no one in the deserted courtyard behind, and there were no lights. It was pitch black. Xiejin led Hao towards the brightly lit place, approaching the front yard. Hearing the sound of people, Xiejin bent down and hugged Hao, holding Hao's shoulders with both hands, and jumped up to the nearest big tree. Sitting high up, you can clearly see the brightly lit wide courtyard. A child of only 4 or 5 years old is kneeling on the blue stone. His face is pale and his body is swaying. He feels a little unable to hold on. He looks like he is already kneeling for a while. Does your highness know who he is? Hao frowned slightly and stared at the child for a long time. Is he the slave's child? In his impression, only servants who made mistakes would be punished by kneeling like this. But the child in front of him was very young, about the same age as him. What mistake could he make? He is the son of the male owner of this family, Xiejin said. His name is Sen. Hao was a little confused. Then isn't he the young master of this family? Yes, Xiejin leaned on the thick tree trunk. The Sen family was a famous and powerful family more than 100 years ago, but it was so glorious. Your highness, have you ever heard of the saying, the greatest prosperity must inevitably decline? Hao turned to look at him. When the Sen family was at its peak, it was as powerful as the current Xie family and Prince Jing's palace combined, Xiejin said calmly. The civil servants in the family held great power, the generals held military power, and they were deeply trusted by the emperor. Although at that time, the Sen family was very loyal, but they still could not hide their position of power approaching the imperial power. Hao was thoughtful. During this period, I read some historical records. The ancestors of the Sen family can be traced back to the time of Empress Jinghua. At that time, she mainly protected the young emperor. When the court was in civil strife and was in danger, the Sen family and the regent at the time protected the young emperor. The regent is in charge of the government, and the Sen family resists foreign enemies. When the young emperor grew up, he valued the Sen family very much. Although Hao didn't fully understand, he just listened quietly. In the following decades, the Sen family became more and more prominent. They chose concubines and established queens and took charge of the military. They prospered from generation to generation, and their descendants continued. By the time of Emperor Wu, finally couldn't match the master's great achievements. Xiejin did not say the next words, but paused for a moment before saying, but the Sen family is very lucky. The 3 generations of emperors they served successively were all wise kings. Even if the Sen family did something they shouldn't have done, considering their past achievements, Emperor Wu did not have the heart to kill the 9 Sen family members, but only killed the old man and several sons of the Sen family who were in power at the time, and all the women and children survived. Hao hummed, not sure if he could understand it. At that time, the only male in the Sen family had just turned 6 years old. The wife of the family took good care of this child, hoping that he could revive the family business. Because they had just experienced a disaster, the Sen family had been silent for a long time. But this child who has everyone's hopes is really ineffective. Compared with other grandfathers and fathers, he can't hold up the wall. No matter how many wives are found for him, his books are still as good as dogs. No matter how many martial arts lessons I find for him, he is still a dandy who can't stand hardships. After he reaches adulthood, he has 3 wives and 4 concubines, and he even goes to a brothel from time to hang out. Uncle Jin seemed to be like this before. Howard suddenly said, Uncle Jin used to like visiting brothels. Siejin's expression paused and his tone was calm. I'm different from him. Howard frowned. What's the difference? Siejin said seriously, most of the time I go to brothels for business reasons. You won't understand it for the time being. You will understand it when you grow up. Howard said oh and did not continue to argue. At his current age, he can never be Siejin's opponent in terms of words, and there is no point in arguing. The dandy I just mentioned is the father of this child. Seeing Siejin pointed to Sen kneeling in the courtyard. Seeing married 2 wives and many concubines after he became an adult, but because of the lack of strict governance in the family has led to serious fights between wives and concubines. There is no distinction between wives and concubines, and the family is in chaos. Howard hummed, not fully understanding these words. This Sen is Seing's youngest son, the son of Su Xian. Siejin clicked his tongue. Seing was nearly 50 years old, so he got this legitimate son. Does your highness know what Su Xian and legitimate son mean? Howard shook his head. His previous wife died, and then he married another wife, who was his second wife. Siejin said, the sons born to the first wife or the second wife are all legitimate sons. Oh. The wife he later married was young, not majestic, and could not hold the power of the back house, and the children he gave birth to were bullied. Siejin said, if Sen died in infancy, the children born from the concubine would have the opportunity to inherit the family business. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 790. Howard looked at him without saying a word. The face that looked so similar to his father's was cold and slightly dazed. Can your highness understand? Howard nodded slowly, then shook his head. Okay, let's go back. Siejin looked around, held Howard's body and flew down the tree, and quickly left the secluded courtyard in the backyard. Are you hungry, your highness? Howard didn't speak, as if he was distracted. What are you thinking about, your highness? Siejin held his hand and walked out of the alley. Think about that child just now. Howard came back to his senses. He's quite pitiful. Siejin hummed, it's indeed quite pitiful. Howard was silent. Does your highness know what I mean by bringing you here tonight to see these things? Howard frowned and shook his head slowly. Siejin was quiet. Do you still remember what I just said? Howard thought for a while. Remember some. Which ones? Men should not bully those weaker than themselves, especially women and children. Siejin raised his eyebrows. Who taught you this sentence? Master. Siejin nodded slowly. What else did the master teach? Howard said, the common people are the foundation of the country. Siejin smiled. It turns out that the master also said this. Howard nodded slowly and suddenly stopped. Uncle Jin, that little brother just now, I want it. Siejin was slightly surprised. Why? He's pathetic. Your highness, there are many poor children in this world. Siejin touched his head. What I show you tonight is just a drop of millet among all living beings. The world is so big, with every state, every city, every county. In every town, whether it is a prosperous place or a barren and backward place, there are men who know how to treat their wives well, and there are also wives who respect their husbands, and there are also cowards and bullies who treat the weak and the weak. Hauer said nothing. Wherever there are people, there will be conflicts of interests, bullying and intrigue. Xiejin crouched down. What we need to do is to formulate reasonable rules to reduce the occurrence of such bullying and abuse as much as possible. Hauer hummed, but I still want him. Why? Tai Tuo said that an emperor should have thunderous skills and a tolerant heart. Hauer's voice was still young, but calm enough. Sen An's father is dirt, but his ancestors are heroes. Because his ancestor was a hero, His Highness wants him. Hauer thought for a while, as if thinking about what to say. He is still young, and he is the legitimate son. He should not be subject to unreasonable oppression and abuse. Xiejin was silent for a moment. His grandfather already had a disobedient heart before he was killed. If your Highness takes him with you, what should you do if he grows up and betrays your Highness? Hauer was confused. Betrayal. It means that His Highness is good to him, but when he grows up, he might bite His Highness or do something detrimental to His Highness. Hauer thought for a while. In the beginning, human nature is inherently good. Xiejin was stunned. Is your nature inherently good? Yes, Hauer nodded. He is still young. Let the master teach him well and he should be fine. Xiejin looked at the child in front of him quietly. He didn't speak for a long time, but he couldn't help but laugh. In the beginning, human beings are inherently good. Although this sentence is not entirely correct, the Sen family does not actually have the blood of treachery and evil. Even Sen Seeing, the incompetent and incompetent generation of this generation, is not a bad person. At best, he can only be regarded as an idiot. Xiejin even once suspected that Sen Seeing was deliberately dandy and unmotivated, and wanted to reduce the Sen family's sense of existence and make the king completely forget about the Sen family. In this way, he could protect the Sen family's young and old. Let's go back first, Xiejin said. If you really want him, you can discuss it with your father. As long as your father agrees. Hauer was silent for a moment and looked at him quietly. What if the father doesn't agree?